Before I turn this video over to the man with the voice of an angel, Steve Clist, I wanted to highlight the Sinking City differences in the Switch version specifically. Because let's be honest, that's probably why you clicked on this video, given the game launched 3 months ago on other platforms with plenty of reviews around the web. Without further ado, let's jump on in. First, the frame rate isn't very steady with drops fairly often. That said, this isn't a very action-heavy game, so luckily that doesn't do much to tarnish the overall gameplay experience. Throughout the game, you'll also notice some stutter and pop-in as you traverse the city. Along with that, character models have been downgraded as well. The Nintendo Switch version loses texture quality in the skin and clothes pretty significantly. This is probably the most jarring part of the Switch port. Throughout the game, you'll talk to a lot of characters. During this, the camera is really close up, showing off every ugly detail of the character models. All of that said, the game isn't unbearably ugly or anything like that. I would even go as far to say it can be quite pretty in some areas. The lighting effects specifically had me impressed a handful of times. Luckily, it's no Resident Evil Revelations 2 on PlayStation Vita situation. In other words, the textures weren't completely wiped from the game to get it running properly on the Switch hardware. The Switch version is available now for $49.99 on the eShop with no physical launch planned at this time. That's all the major highlights of the Nintendo Switch version that I've noticed. Other than that, you can trust every word Steve Clist has to say about the Sinking City. Let's switch on over to him. I always wanted to do that.
The Sinking City may not have such highbrow influences as Huxley and Orwell, but it is steeped in the work of H.P. Lovecraft. This American author is best known for his gothic horror and fantasy fiction. It isn't based on any particular one of his works, but there are clear elements of Call of Cthulhu and Shadows over Innsmouth. The author's penchant for weak-minded people being controlled by outside influences is a central conceit here. Fortunately, some of the author's ideas on race are not reflected. After all, he was a white man in the 1920s and 30s. Some strong racial themes are running through the Sinking City, but they're very much in line with modern-day thinking. This is very much an adventure game with shooter and RPG elements. You could actually make your way through vast swathes of the game without ever shooting anything. In fact, because ammo is so sparse, running away is often a very sensible tactic. The lack of ammo and slow shooting mechanics give this a bit of a survival horror vibe. What is at the core of this game though is an old school adventure game that requires you to find evidence and clues. These then lead you to the next puzzle for you to solve. This will be familiar to anyone who has played Frogware's brilliant Sherlock Holmes titles. In fact, the developer has decided to keep their deduction and mind palace mechanics from those games. Oakmont comes across as a brilliantly creepy, dilapidated version of Venice. About half of the roads are underwater and require you to either use a boat or hop on a ferry to reach dry land again. It is possible to swim, but creatures below the surface will quickly attack you. Fortunately, you'll nearly always be able to find a boat just where you need one. The city is foggy, often raining, and feels oppressive. Praise also has to go to the development team's art designers. Everything seems weathered, used and lived in. Even in the more upmarket areas of the map, nothing is pristine, and it all fits together brilliantly. The actual stories that the game tells are also a particular strength for the Sinking City. I found the central plot to be gripping, and it had enough twists and turns to keep me on my toes. Some of the side quests were highlights though. They not only help to flesh out the world and the situation you find yourself in, they're not all flawless, but the more generic fetch quests are definitely in the minority. The writing in the Sinking City is definitely a cut above the average game. Dialogue feels natural and reveals character as much as exposition. There's quite a lot of content on offer here. If you only do the main quests and don't struggle with any of the puzzles, you should probably complete this in 12 to 15 hours. Most gamers are going to be looking at 20 to 40 hours, depending on how many side quests and how completionist you want to be. You can also extend the game by just going into some of the infected areas and trying to take out as many wild beasts as you can. I do like that this is an option, however the combat doesn't quite stand up to that level of scrutiny. There are also enough alternative decisions throughout the game that I'm intrigued to play through the game again to see what differences they create. I found myself drawn into the Sinking City. The game has been on my radar ever since Frogwares announced that the next game was not going to be a Sherlock Holmes title. Moving from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle for their source material to H.P. Lovecraft seems to have given the team the freedom to try and stretch their legs. This is not the kind of game that requires a rock-steady 60 frames per second. However, if Frogwares could fix some of the screen tearing, it would be helpful. At the end of the day, it was the story that got its hooks into me far more than the action. The adventure it takes you on paired with the atmosphere are what set this apart. Well, at least differentiates it from the rest of the Bioshock wannabes.